Alright folks, buckle up because tonight we're diving into the wild world of international law. Specifically, we're talking about the International Court of Justice, or ICJ for short. You might be thinking, international law? That sounds about as exciting as watching paint dry. But hold your horses because this stuff is important. We're talking about a court that settles disputes between countries. Think border disagreements, accusations of human rights violations, you name it. It's like Judge Judy, but instead of fighting over a broken microwave, it's about, potential acts of war. Now, the ICJ isn't some all-powerful entity that can boss countries around. It doesn't have its own army or anything, but its decisions carry serious weight. When the ICJ rules on a case, it's basically setting down the law of the land, or in this case, the law of the world. And while countries don't always like what the court has to say, ignoring a ruling can lead to serious consequences like international sanctions or damage to a country's reputation. So yeah, the ICJ might not be as instantly thrilling as, say, a cage fight between a bear and a shark, but it plays a vital role in keeping the peace and promoting justice on a global scale. And that, my friends, is something worth paying attention to. To understand the ICJ, we need to rewind the clock a bit. After the horrors of World War I, people were desperate to prevent another global bloodbath. The League of Nations was formed with the noble goal of maintaining world peace, and part of that plan involved creating a permanent court of international justice. Think of it as the ICJ's older, slightly less cool sibling. This court, established in 1922, was a big deal. It was the first permanent international court dedicated to settling disputes between states peacefully. No more resorting to violence at the drop of a hat. The court heard some important cases during its time, but unfortunately it wasn't enough to prevent World War II. The League of Nations crumbled, and the court along with it. But the dream of a peaceful world didn't die. After the devastation of World War II, the United Nations rose from the ashes, determined to learn from the mistakes of the past. And one of the first things they did was establish a new and improved international court, the International Court of Justice. It was 1945, a new world order was emerging, and the ICJ was ready to take center stage in the pursuit of international justice. Now, you might be surprised to learn that the United States and the United Kingdom, two countries not exactly known for their humility, played a key role in setting up the ICJ. Yes, you heard that right. The same nations that gave us colonialism and reality TV were instrumental in establishing a court meant to hold countries accountable for their actions. Irony, thy name is international relations. But let's give credit where credit's due. Both countries had some pretty smart cookies pushing for a strong international legal system. Guys like Cordell Hull, the US Secretary of State at the time, and British legal scholar Hersch Lauterpacht, who believed that a rules-based international order was the best way to prevent another war. They argued that a court where countries could settle their differences peacefully was essential. Of course, it wasn't all altruism and kumbaya moments. Both the US and the UK knew that a stable world order was in their best interest. But hey, whatever their motivations, they helped create a lasting institution that continues to promote peace and justice today. So kudos to them, I guess. So, where does all the legal magic happen? Well, the ICJ is headquartered in The Hague, Netherlands, in a fancy building called the Peace Palace. No, seriously, that's what it's called. It's like something out of a fairy tale, except instead of princesses and talking animals, you have lawyers and diplomats arguing about international treaties. Now, the heart of the ICJ is its 15 judges. These aren't just any old judges, mind you. They're elected by the UN General Assembly and the Security Council, and are supposed to be the best legal minds on the planet. They come from all over the world, represent different legal systems, and serve 9-year terms. And get this, they wear these long black robes while presiding over cases. It's all very official and intimidating, which I guess is the point. The judges are responsible for examining evidence, listening to arguments from both sides, and ultimately issuing a judgment. And their decisions are final and binding on the countries involved. No ifs, ands, or buts. Well, unless a country decides to completely ignore the ruling, which unfortunately has happened before, but more on that later. Section 5, settling squabbles and giving advice, the ICJ's day job. So, what exactly does the ICJ do? Well, its main gig is to settle legal disputes between countries. We're talking about everything from arguments over territory and maritime boundaries to accusations of human rights abuses and violations of international law. Think of it as the ultimate mediator for squabbling nations. But the ICJ's work doesn't stop there. It also provides advisory opinions to UN organs and specialized agencies. Basically, if the UN has a legal question, they can ask the ICJ for its expert opinion. It's like having a legal hotline for the entire UN system. Now here's the catch. The ICJ can only hear cases if both countries involved agree to let it. It's like couples therapy. Both parties have to be willing to participate for it to work. And even then, there's no guarantee that countries will actually follow the court's ruling. It's a bit like relying on the honor system among nations, which, let's be honest, isn't always the most effective strategy. Section 6. UN members on the docket, a global courtroom. Here's a fun fact. Every single member of the United Nations is automatically a party to the ICJ's founding treaty, the Statute of the International Court of Justice. That means over 190 countries have signed up to this whole international law thing. It's like a giant legal club, except instead of discussing contract law over cocktails, they're debating the finer points of genocide and war crimes. Now, just because a country is a UN member doesn't mean they can drag any other country to court willy-nilly. As we mentioned earlier, both countries have to agree to let the ICJ hear the case. And there are a few ways this can happen. They can sign a treaty that specifically says the ICJ has jurisdiction over any disputes. They can make a special agreement to submit a particular dispute to the court. Or they can just generally accept the court's jurisdiction, which is about as legally binding as a pinky swear between toddlers. The point is, getting countries to agree on anything, let alone submitting themselves to the judgment of an international court, can be like herding cats. But hey, at least the option is there, right? Section 7. Landmark cases, when the world held its breath. Over the years, the ICJ has handled some pretty high-profile cases that have shaped international law and captured the world's attention. These aren't your run-of-the-mill parking ticket disputes, folks. We're talking about cases involving genocide, border wars, and the use of nuclear weapons. The stakes don't get much higher than that. One famous case involved a dispute between Nicaragua and the United States in the 1980s. Nicaragua accused the U.S. of supporting Contra rebels who were fighting against the Nicaraguan government. The ICJ ruled in favor of Nicaragua, saying the U.S. had violated international law by supporting the Contras and mining Nicaraguan harbors. The U.S., however, rejected the court's jurisdiction and refused to comply with the ruling. It was a major blow to the ICJ's authority and showed that even superpowers could flout international law if they felt like it. Another landmark case involved a dispute between Australia and Japan over whaling in the Southern Ocean. Australia argued that Japan's whaling program was a front for commercial whaling, which is banned by international law. The ICJ agreed with Australia and ordered Japan to stop its whaling program. Japan initially complied with the ruling but later resumed whaling in the region, albeit on a smaller scale. It was a partial victory for Australia, and a reminder that enforcing international law is an ongoing battle. Section 8. The ICJ's legacy, shaping a more just world. So, after all this talk of international law and court cases, you might be wondering, what's the point? Does the ICJ actually make a difference in the world? Well, the answer, like most things in international relations, is complicated. The ICJ isn't perfect. It doesn't always have the power to enforce its rulings, and countries can choose to ignore its decisions. But that doesn't mean it's useless. The ICJ plays a vital role in upholding international law, resolving disputes peacefully, and holding states accountable for their actions. It provides a forum for countries to air their grievances and seek justice through legal means, rather than resorting to violence. And that, my friends, is no small feat. In a world where conflict and injustice often reign supreme, the ICJ stands as a beacon of hope, a symbol of our collective aspiration for a more peaceful and just world order. It might not be perfect, but it's a damn sight better than the alternative. And that's something worth fighting for, even if it means wading through a lot of legal jargon along the way.